Ashes of Creation has just launched in early access on Steam, and the reception has been, well, mixed. In this video, I want to talk about the state of the game, the cultists, the doomers, and the behavior of Intrepid, and the future of Ashes of Creation. With all that balls out of the way, let's begin, shall we? As I said, early access of Ashes of Creation launched just on Steam. The game, as you probably know, is being made by Intrepid Studios, and that's fronted by Stephen J. Sharif. The initial reviews on Steam, they show on the main page as being mixed, very borderline being mostly negative. And in this video, I'm not really going to talk about the early access version too much. More, I'm going to talk about the vibe surrounding the game, the criticism that if people give it, the reactions that they're getting to those criticisms. And I think ultimately Intrepid Studios and maybe even Stephen J. Sharif aren't necessarily being fully held accountable to the things that they've said and done during the development of this game. And I'm going to try and explain what the hell I'm talking about. So there have now been a lot of people giving their feedback on the early access version of Steam, and I've seen three main counter arguments that the people who want this game to be successful are giving. Those three arguments would be, well, one, it's not finished, it's an alpha, therefore, why are you talking about it, right? Anything that you have a problem with, well, it might get fixed, so let's try and remain optimistic. Two, anything that was once promised before was actually subject to change and work in progress, so if it doesn't come in the form that they said it was, then that's not a problem because we all knew things could change. And three, well, the game is supposed to be like this, and the game might simply not be for you. Now, in theory, with those three statements, you can pretty much hand wave away almost every single criticism you can throw at the early access. Logically speaking, it sort of makes sense. Those three statements are somewhat true, but I'm quite fed up of hearing them about any kind of reasonable criticism. And there's actually two kind of things I'm talking about here. There's the criticism of the early access version of Ashes of Creation, and then there's the meta criticism of Intrepid Studios and Stephen. I'm actually focusing more on the meta criticism here because it's true, right? The early access version I think does have some flaws, it's got some positive bits, but I don't really know what that game will be when it launches, if it launches. Nobody can really review that, right? It doesn't really make any sense. Now let's go through quickly those 3 points and explain why they don't make any sense. Or they make some sense, but they're not necessarily always applicable. One, it's not finished. Well, of course, right? It's early access. I would say that they didn't need to launch into early access on Steam, but they are now like properly taking people's money, and early access is supposed to be a full purchase of a playable game, and it's supposed to be an enjoyable experience. I think if you're going to try and use the argument that actually you're supporting development, then you should have probably been doing that before it launched on Steam. I think Steam is more like, hey, pay attention to us, we want you to play our game right now, and it should be fun. I think at some point the it's not finished, let them cook is a little bit weird. Let's say I promised you I was going to build you a big, giant, tall skyscraper and I was going to have it done in 5 years. And then 8 years later, I'm like, we're not done yet. At some point, there would be a reasonable question of like, hey, like, what are you doing? Like, hurry up. It's not necessarily the fact that it's not finished, it's the fact it's taking so long to finish, I think, which is actually the main criticism. And similarly, when it's subject to change, well, again, if I was selling you a skyscraper and I said it's going to be the tallest in the world, and then I just actually decide, well, no, it's not going to be a skyscraper, I'm going to make it a big, tall apartment building instead, that's half the size. Again, you'd be a little bit perturbed by that. You'd be like, hey, what are you doing? And the third argument that's like getting used to hand wave away criticism is that it's supposed to be like this and the game is not for you. Well, my problem with that is it's really hard to know if something is for you until you try it. And the game in the early access is very hard to try in a sense, right? Well, that depends on your point of view. So there are quests from around about level 1 to maybe 8 or 10. And then from that point onwards up until the max level of 25, it's effectively getting in a big group and grinding for like 50 to 100 hours. Now, some people are going to enjoy that experience and some people won't. The problem is, a lot of people don't even know if that's the intended experience when the game actually will launch. Like, I'm pretty sure Stephen at one point was talking about how there will be quests all the way up until 50. Like when we get the story arcs and stuff like that, there'll be stuff to do, but it won't necessarily be like a guided MSQ. But then you go in the Reddit threads and stuff like that, and a lot of them are like, no, we enjoy this grinding experience. It's actually super fun. Just quickly on the grind, I remember specifically there's an interview with Jeffrey Bard and Stephen Sharif, and Jeffrey Bard was, I think, the creative director or something, and he's like, somebody says, will the game be grindy? And he goes, there will be absolutely no grind. And you can kind of see Stephen next to him being a little bit uncomfortable and trying to like interject a little bit, because he's like, oh, it'll be meaningful and stuff like that. But even the devs at that point didn't necessarily know if the game would be very grindy. So how the hell we're supposed to know what's intended right now? I mean, God only knows. My point is that, you know, whilst there is probably a truth with what that is, there's loads of things like that where we, as a collective, we don't really fully know what the game is going to be like and who it's actually for. I could talk about more about that, but for example, the PvP is a little bit weird. You're supposed to be able to like PvP when there's like a contested area, but a lot of people are saying it's now too punishing, so you don't really want to do that because, you know, if you actually do too much PvP, you can't change your weapons, and if you die, you could lose your weapons and then you can't even fight. Whilst things are being worked on and they're not finished and they are subject to change, it's very hard to define who the game is for. So for me, those three criticisms, potentially valid, but also potentially not when you look at the meta situation around Intrepid. Now, what am I even talking about? Right, obviously, the game's, you know, it started its development in 2017 by Intrepid Studios, headed by Stephen J. Sharif. But I think one of the problems started there. Basically, Stephen Sharif is a very charismatic, charming, intelligent, well-spoken guy. And I think you combine that with a desperation for a good MMO, which we've just simply not had for many years, or if we have had, they've been paid to win, and all different kinds of problems. But I think effectively that combination weirdly led to the Cultists. Now, the Cultists may have started out as a joke, but I think there's a lot of people who some of them have spent big money in the game, some of them are just very desperate, some of them are excited, some of them believe Stephen, and it's led to people being a little bit overzealous in the defense of Ashes of Creation. Now, let me be clear. I want Ashes of Creation to be a good game. I want it to be successful. I hope that they can turn the early access, these mixed reviews, into some kind of end game, fully finished product that is incredible, no pay to win. I like the sound of the vision. Might not actually be a game that I'm personally interested in just because of the PvP, but that's, you know, I can't really know that yet because I'm not really sure how it's going to feel like yet. But even if it's not a game for me, I still want the game to be successful and I still want the game to be good. To be honest with you, not necessarily a believer that that will be achieved, even though I want it to be achieved. But yeah, I think there was like a cult surrounding the game. Partly, you know, headed up, the most famous of which was probably Narc. Narc's career kind of like, you know, I think he eventually sort of lost interest in the game. He became disillusioned with the game and effectively crashed out, if you like, right? And then there's a couple of things around that which I didn't necessarily like that Intrepid and Stephen did. Like, for example, I really did not like the way that Stephen spoke about Narc. It was actually a comment in his video, so I don't have that right now. But basically saying to take a break for your mental health. Now, there's two things there. One, I didn't necessarily appreciate the bringing up of mental health. I think whilst that may even be an accurate statement, I think it was inappropriate for him to say, right? I don't think Stephen should be getting involved in the community on that level when there's criticism being thrown out like that. The take a break for your mental health I thought was inappropriate and misplaced. And then overall, the way criticism is being dealt with and in this cult-like fashion, for example, just in a recent interview, he basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, but I'm going to play the clip for you in a second. He basically said that criticism can be harmful. Play the clip.
Sometimes it is much easier to be a skeptic, a cynic, and a person who points out the negatives and problems, which then perhaps hurts the chances of that particular product coming to fruition.
Absolutely.
So while you might be true in saying, you know, this looks like shit, or, you know, why don't you have these materials and textures fixed, or why are there these bugs there, or this design is trash, like those types of commentaries, like it is very easy to be a skeptic on something that's unfinished. It's easy to walk into a kitchen and to see an unfinished a meal
Definitely
on the table and say, that looks like shit, right? Well, it's not done yet.
Absolutely.
And the whole purpose of a vision is to get sign-on from the people who are interested in seeing that vision come to fruition, so that you can go out and get support for everything that is needed to actually make that happen.
And what he says there is somewhat true, right? But my problem with it is that it gives the cultists a little bit of ammunition to try and effectively ignore any criticism thrown at the game. It's not necessarily a problem that Ashes of Creation is in early access and being worked on. It's more a problem that it's taking this long and they've said things that haven't materialized, and they're taking people's money at this point. It's kind of the meta criticism that's more important than the specific criticism. He talks there about like some food in the kitchen, how, you know, it's all being cooked. You wouldn't say it's rubbish until it's ready. But unfortunately, it's like what they've done is like, oh, we're making you a cake and the cake's going to be ready in a couple of weeks. But actually, no, the cake's not going to be a couple of weeks. It's going to be a couple of years. And actually, the cake that I said was going to be originally a chocolate cake, it's now a vanilla cake. And instead of it being 3 tiers tall, it's now going to be 2 tiers tall. But don't worry, at the start of this, I actually said it was all work in progress and it was subject to change. So you actually can't criticize it. You're just going to get what you're given. I think if you were the customer of somebody and you were buying a cake from somebody, you would kind of have some expectations, and it wouldn't be crazy if those expectations weren't hit on some level that you were a little bit displeased. So that's my belief. I don't really like the way that Stephen in the past has dealt with criticism. I think the take a break for your mental health was, as I said, inappropriate. And I think these statements about negativity, whilst potentially true, you just have to suck it up, right? If you're doing open development, that kind of stuff, you just have to suck it up. And especially if you're unnecessarily launching in early access on Steam, like that's something that you chose into. Ultimately, I think that has led to a culture from some people of like this toxic positivity. If you're not going to say anything nice, don't say anything at all, which, you know, is probably true if you're talking with your friends. I'm not sure that's true when we're talking about business agreements and, you know, the exchange of money between products. But it is what it is. Now, overall, the main thing that I want to talk about here is some of the reasons that I'm a little bit disillusioned with Intrepid Studios and with Stephen, right? I'm very, very quickly going to do a very, very brief review of the early access. Now, there's a big problem with this. I have not done most of the content in the early access, and I didn't do it in phase 1 either. And the main reason for that is I am not prepared to grind my ass through that group grinding. I tried it in phase 1 and I spent tens and tens of hours trying to get there, and I just absolutely got bored and ditched. And this time around, I basically ran out of quests and then ditched again because the thought of doing the group grinding really put me off, especially when the game's going to be wipes and stuff like that. So I'm very much aware that my opinion of the early access, it's a drop in the ocean. I really don't know too much. Now, some people are going to immediately use that as be like, Jay, you didn't play the game enough. You don't know what you're talking about, with ignoring literally everything else that I say in this video. I would say personally, like if the game is not going to have that grind, that group grind at the end, like at the launch, then why are we doing it now? Why not just let us skip it? I know the journey is going to be important in the end game when it launches, but if that's not even going to be the way it is, then let me skip it. If it is going to be the way that it is, then to be honest, I think it's bad design, but I might do it one time, the first time. I'm not going to do it knowing that there's wipes coming. Now, there may not be that many wipes during the early access, apart from the beta and what have you, but during phase 1 to phase now, there's like 3 or 4 wipes. So I don't know, the impermanence is definitely a problem for me. Anyway, quick TLDR, if I was going to review it. The pros of the game would be the combat. I think the combat's pretty decent. Effectively, a lot of the stuff that I say here are the same stuff that I would have said last year, so you can probably just check out that video. It's the same kind of stuff. The world visuals are sometimes nice, sometimes a bit ugly, but sometimes nice. I enjoyed the quest existing. For me, that's a boon. I'm a theme park enjoyer. The game may not be for me, but I mean, again, we'll find out when it launches. The server stability was kind of okay. Been a few desyncs, but I thought that was all right. There's no pay to win. I mean, they're not going to have it when they launch, and it's nice to have it here. There were gold sellers in the chat, though. Lols. The systems, most of which I didn't actually interact with, but I like the sound of the systems, the caravans, the nodes, the sailing, the fishing, the sport fishing, and stuff like that. Yeah, that sounds good. The gathering and crafting seems like it's going to be pretty good. Apart from maybe the timed crafting, that seemed a bit jank to me. I think a lot of the positives I never got to, so I'm very much aware of that, and I think those will be those systems, that PvP, that meaningful engagement and crafting and stuff like that. The cons for me, though, would be the vast world is pretty empty. Like, there's not that many mobs in there, and it all just feels like completely barren. The quests are pretty awkward. They're like hard to find. There are some breadcrumbs to send you to the next area, but probably not enough. Some of them were just straight up bugged as well. The quests, as I said, stop around about level 8 to 10, and then you end up doing the mob grinding, which for me is something that I am just not doing. I'm not doing it. I may not do it ever, and I'm definitely not doing it in an early access. That might wipe or will wipe. For some people, that's a pro, by the way. The pros and con list is pretty subjective, obviously. I think the animations aren't great. I think the camera is bad. For some reason, it just doesn't feel very nice. The world visuals, as I said, are kind of nice, but I do think it feels a little bit uninspired, like it has no real soul to the world. The skill tree UI is just terrible. The concept overall, in my opinion, kind of sounds a little bit dated, or feels a bit dated as well, actually. The nighttime for me is just too dark and purple, and overall it's just a lot of bugs. But ultimately, I think the main problem with the game is simply that it's unfinished, and the time to release seems pretty far away, like 2, 3, 4 years away perhaps, which we've been saying now for many years. One of the big cons was also the fact that people couldn't link their accounts from the website to the Steam account, which meant you couldn't play the game on launch, which sucked. Which, by the way, that is not review bombing. I saw the Cultist reviews that were like, I can't believe people are review bombing this game. Yes, of course they can't play it, but that's to be expected. And it's like, yeah, when you get a new launch, especially with an MMO, I often expect it to be broken, but it's not a review bomb if you can't play the game that you've paid for. That's just actual like freedom of speech and people getting their thoughts across to the developers. I think that was a genuine criticism basically, and also having to have the website be linked to the game Steam was pretty stupid anyway. Anyway, that wasn't a review bomb. Cultists, get over yourselves. Right, I mean, that wasn't necessarily a TLDR as much as I thought. That went on a little bit longer, but let's talk about what this video is about, and that's whether or not we should even believe that Intrepid are going to make this game. That's the big question, I guess, especially if you're thinking about giving them some money and participating in the development. So a couple of the problems, one problem I have is just the way things are communicated. Rather infamously on my stream right now, we talk about this. In August 2018, Stephen Sharif went into Discord and said that the game would release before 2020. Well, we're now pretty much heading into 2026, so that didn't materialize. Okay, now some of this you're going to be like, he's inexperienced, they didn't know what was left, but I mean that's a pretty big miscalculation, right? Wrong by about 6 years and counting. Okay, maybe that's just one thing, but it also ties into the next thing that I want to talk about, which is I don't think they fully communicated what happened between Unreal Engine 4 and Unreal Engine 5. So there was a developer who claimed that basically the full production of the game started in 2021. Now, this developer is under NDA, so can't really say too much, but it coincides with when they moved from Unreal Engine 4 to Unreal Engine 5. And I think the communication around that, if the developer is somewhat true and stating facts, then the communication around that was simply not that, right? In fact, in the live stream, I think they said that it would take a couple of months to move from Unreal Engine 4 to Unreal Engine 5. Now, I don't actually think they started from scratch. Like, technically, when they moved from UE4 to UE5, they did not start from scratch because some assets and stuff like that have obviously materialized. But I think it's, I don't want to say it's obvious, but I think you can say that a lot of the systems have effectively, they feel like they started in 2021. And this is actually sort of being generous to them, right? Because if you don't believe that, then you believe what we have right now is the work of 8 years. And it kind of doesn't feel or look like that. A lot of people think that like the main bulk of the production really started when they hit UE5, and what they had beforehand was effectively like demos of systems and stuff like that. So I personally believe that the bulk of the production did start in 2021. I could be wrong, obviously, but if that's true, then it also questions again what happened with the 2018 statement saying it would come before 2020. How can you think that the game is within 18 months of launch, only to be wrong by like 6 years, and then actually only to start the development properly in 2021? Like, I just feel like that the communication around that was very bad. And I don't want to say disingenuous, but I mean, without knowing what went on behind the scenes and without being a dev myself, it's really hard to know exactly what happened, but I'm very dubious of that moment. I can't lie. Like, I really think some of the communication around that was not great. Now, you could argue that obviously he has to say that, right? Why would he throw himself under the bus? Why would Intrepid be like, guys, we just started again. Like, we think UE5 is going to be better. We're going to start again. Like, people would have been rightly annoyed. So did they kind of just not say it, but do it? Maybe. This open development, not necessarily as transparent as you would think. It's looking kind of opaque to me. Next thing, they randomly decided to release at some point a Battle Royale, Ashes of Creation Apocalypse. Now, that was not well received at all. That had very overwhelmingly negative reviews, I think. Even though, honestly, the game kind of looked better to me. I like the action combat. I kind of regret never playing it. It looks like something that would have been up my street. But more importantly from that is the Intrepid Studios that launched that is something like Intrepid Studios, Inc. But that's a different one from the one that has launched the early access. They're actually now different accounts. And the big question there would be, why? Well, the most favorable answer, I guess, would be they've lost access to the account. Although it actually looks like the Apocalypse version got a slight update a couple of days ago, probably because of the launch of the early access. I'm not sure about that. So that doesn't seem very likely. And if it wasn't because they lost access to the account, was it a deliberate move to get away from the negativity of that game? That would be against Steam TOS, so obviously that's not true. That couldn't be why. Another thing that I think that has been, like, I guess, badly miscommunicated, if I'm looking favorably, some would say maybe maliciously miscommunicated here, and that is the marketing surrounding the live stream showcases. Now, apparently that's not marketing, but I think for all intents and purposes it is. You're going on a stream and showing people the current state of the development. But I think that they weren't necessarily showing the current state of the development. They were showing you what they wanted the development to actually end up being. Effectively, a lot of the showcases look like vertical slices, is what I'm saying. And a vertical slice is basically a demo that highlights how they would want the system to work and maybe test it out. And that applied to the freehold system, that applied to the desert, that applied to the caravans. Those three things were not in the game when Alpha 2 launched. Now, this is where it's the communication issue, right? Like, if you're talking about Alpha 2 and what's going to be included, and you start showing me videos of the things that you are working on that are going to be in the Alpha 2, I start thinking that those are going to be at the launch of Alpha 2, and they will be in a work in progress state, and they will not be finished. But actually, at some point, it sounded like that they changed their mind, and then they started talking about, oh, this might not be in at the start of Alpha 2. They started caveating it later in the date. Now, you could argue, well, that's because they wanted it to be in and then it got pushed. But I mean, for me, that all seemed like, as I said, demos, right? If they're not actually ready, why are you showcasing them? Why are you showing me a trailer of the desert before Alpha 2 is even live, when in the Alpha 2 Phase 1, that desert isn't there? It only actually materializes in Phase 2. Now, I know Narc did a video with the desert and that kicked off. That subject was sort of wild. The desert was in, but it was small, and then it got bigger, and I don't know, that was just not a particularly great, well-communicated part on either of their parts, I think, Steven's or Narc's, but whatever, right? You just show me stuff, telling me it's coming in an alpha, and then you eventually decide, oh, actually, it's not coming at the launch of alpha. I think you were showing me demos, right? I don't think you were showing me necessarily the current state of the Alpha 2. Now, you can say it's work in progress, subject to change. I felt personally misled by that, and I think many other people did. Some things still aren't in, by the way. The freehold system, I think, got added and then removed, but it's still not in the game. But we were shown it many, many years ago at this point, I think. So yeah, I didn't like the way that they did the live streams in the past. I think they're a little bit better now, because the things that they show then come the next time. Like, I think the corruption harbinger system is in the game, and they only showed it off in the last feature, so, you know, I'm okay with that. I just think in the past they weren't necessarily particularly open about it. Another thing, they said they would never release on Steam. Well, early access is on Steam, so that changed. Another thing, I've not really enjoyed the use of FOMO. For example, I mean, there's been FOMO completely throughout the development of this game, the Kickstarter, etc. There was rotating cosmetics for the people who were backers. There's no rotating cosmetics in the early access, by the way, which are time limited. Selling cosmetics in an early access is kind of funky, but, you know, at least you can actually use them, I guess. Some of them look absolutely diabolical and are just recolors effectively. The armor skins in particular, the mounts I kind of like, but some of them are even actually just a recolor. That ends, I think, in February, so they're time limited. The main FOMO that I think a lot of people would have experienced was when they stopped selling the $250 packages and then reopened them up later. No indication given at the time that they would reopen them. It was pretty obvious to some people that they would, but they could have said it. They pretty much knew they were going to do it, I think, but they didn't say it. Just a lot of FOMO. Now, FOMO is a sales tactic that works, and it should be used accordingly at times, but I think Intrepid basically overuse it. That's my vibe anyway. And now, where are we at? Well, I think they are effectively now rushing to try and release the game, and they're cutting systems, which of course makes sense on some levels, right? That is probably not atypical, but I think fundamentally it's going to change what Ashes of Creation was meant to be. So what am I talking about? I think they're cutting things. Well, they've already cut a couple of things. For example, they cut the amount of node tiers. Instead of it being 6, I think it's down to 5. And if you listen to Stephen Sharif talk, now he's talking more about the minimum viable product, which is basically the minimum they can get away with at releasing where everybody is happy enough, right? That's getting mentioned more often. Obviously, he's mentioned it before, but I do really feel like it's getting mentioned a lot more. And the release will be predicated on that MVP. A couple of things that they're talking about that are going to get scaled back. It sounds like the underworld is just going to get pared back, and I'm not really sure what form it will be, but they kind of need it for caravans, but it won't be a vast system. I think they're scaling it back. And in a recent interview, they spoke about, it was Stephen. He spoke about how the second continent is predicated, and I'm just going to keep using that word because Stephen does, on the right outsource partner. So basically they can find somebody cheap enough to do it, and he'll do it at the right quality. You might end up seeing the continent. In all honesty, I'm not personally expecting the second continent to be there at launch. Launch is when I don't know, whenever they get ready for it, right? I'm personally not expecting it. Now, that's a big one for me because, like, a lot of people, I'll say this on stream, people be like, but Jay, the first continent's big enough, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, yeah, well, to me, it did matter, right? Because I was embracing the vision that we were told. And when Stephen spoke about this big open world and the second continent and how there was going to be trade routes and, you know, different culture starting areas and nodes that are different types and all this kind of stuff, for me, I was buying into that vision only for it to be changed. Like the skyscraper has been reduced in half. The cake is going to be twice as small. And yet it's supposed to be the same thing because, I don't know, it just is. Like in theory, that will also probably decrease the number of players per server. Instead of it being 10,000, it might be 5,000 now. By the way, the servers are not particularly great at 5,000 because they're opening new servers because they're buggy and laggy and what have you, but whatever, right? And then what does that impact have? Well, that means there's going to be more merges, which means that your server history is going to be less relevant. Like, there's knock-on impacts from changing things slightly, or potentially slightly, I actually think it's relatively major, that are going to affect the rest of the experience. And the cultists will just tell you, don't worry about that. It's fine. It might be fine, right? But for me, again, how are we supposed to know until it materializes, I guess, right? I think ultimately it was probably easier to talk a good game than it is to deliver a good game. And yeah, okay, so the stuff that's getting scaled back, to be honest, that makes sense because they've got so much to do. And I'm just going to quickly list from Reddit what there is. This is from Sanic Explosion. Now, keep in mind, I haven't necessarily fully validated this, but, you know, it seems vaguely accurate. But the missing content is 3 biomes on the west, the east continent, or they said that might be cut, the Underrealm, 25 plus content quests, events, story arcs, mobs, world, dungeon and raid bosses, caravan ship variations and components, Tulnar, some weapons, node and guild variations, religion, social orgs, astrology, monster coin, castle sieges, housing, freeholds, guild housing, transmog, instancing, arenas, battlegrounds, dungeons, augment, story arcs, bounty hunting, accessory system, dynamic boss difficulty, the level 5 node, election types, taverns, player shops, flight, caravan paths, node death, policies, node happiness, diplomacy, node trade routes, racial node aesthetic, artisan skill trees, surveying pylons functionality, group gathering, animal husbandry, hunting, crafting, modularity, gear ascension, siege weapons, caravan and mercenary, progression paths, party raid, VoIP, combat pets, although they might be cut, racial background stats, power games, and there might be more than that. All in all, like, this is such a crazy topic to be talking about, right? I would assume that most people really want a new Western MMO that's not pay to win, not Korean garbage slop that just feels very gamey and like a shop. We're looking for something that the Westerners are going to enjoy, right? And I can see why you want Ashes of Creation to be, especially if you're a PvXer and you like that friction. I definitely get why the game would be appealing and why a lot of us would want the game to do well. I want it to do well, even if it ends up not being a game for me. I think my main thing here is I kind of want the cultists to wake up a little bit. I kind of want the people who are thinking about spending the game to see the history of the development and to just know what they're getting into before they actually do it. And personally, I think we should get better communication from Intrepid. I don't fully believe that they've been as open as they possibly could have been about a couple of things. Now, maybe they'll say that that's in the interest of the game and the development, and maybe that's the case. Maybe open development wasn't for them, though. Some people are worried about if the game will get finished, and I think I've presented why you might be genuinely worried about that. And that's not even necessarily talking about finance. I know Stephen will say he's got the money to cover it, and it's a little bit awkward to talk about people's personal finances. A lot of people are looking at the early access though on Steam and thinking, is it a bit of a cash grab? They're getting sued for 800,000, but 800,000 is a drop in the ocean to Stephen. You kind of let it be known that 800,000 is what they're spending in operating costs per week, which is basically 40 odd million per year. No wonder they're trying to hurry up and get the game out, because they're hemorrhaging money. I don't know, right? I want the game to be successful. I want them to make it, but it just looks like they're biting off more than they can chew. Their eyes are bigger than their belly. And I'm not really a fan of the way that they've conducted themselves along the way, I guess. Now, it should be known here, I have a slight conflict of interest. As far as I know, I am in the official content creator program for this game. I think you can safely say that I'm probably not biased or affected by that, but I might be, maybe I would have gone harsher if I wasn't in that. I think after all that, if you are aware of the history of Intrepid and all the conversation surrounding it, if you really are that desperate, or you're very rich and you don't care about $40 and you want to go and support the game, go ahead and play it, right? If you're having fun, have fun. If you enjoy that grindy nature and you enjoy the open world PvP and the sieges and the caravans and all this kind of jazz, embrace it, enjoy it, right? I'm genuinely happy for you. I would caution though that it might be that the game ultimately might change and you might not realize it even if you're playing right now. If you're somebody who likes that grind, well, the minute they have quests from level 1 to max, maybe that grind won't be quite as bad as it is right now. And maybe that'll make you lose your interest. Who's to say, right? Who's to say? That's it. I mean, this has been a long video. I do apologize. If I've got anything wrong, let me know in the comments. I suspect the comment section is going to be very interesting and very spicy here. Please try and keep it civil at least. No personal attacks either, right? If you really, well, I mean, you can normally personal attack me, but not in this one. If you really think I've said something wrong, argue the point. Don't argue inexperience in the game, how much I like New World, even though I'm a bit of a New World Andy. Like, actually, don't strawman it. Argue the specific points that I've made. And if you do that, we'll have a good time and we'll all be friendly and there's no need for animosity. Good luck to Intrepid. I hope the game gets made. Looking at it right now with the player base they have right now, I think it's going to be very difficult, but I still wish them all the best. And I wish you all the best. I'm still going to cope around for Chrono Odyssey. Maybe I'm going to be the Chrono Odyssey cultist. The Chrono Cultist. Goodbye.